been just wonderful. You guys are so lucky to have her here. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with her. I have to just say one thing. I've been here for a few days and speaking at different schools, and this is the best turnout. I'm so impressed so many of you turned out, and I have to say something, because usually it's the moms, you know, in my book I have chapters especially for the moms and stuff. This is the most evenly divided audience I have ever had. So, it says a lot about a community when all the men come out just as much as the women do. Yeah. So, okay. So I'm an expert on what's going wrong with kids, and at the end of it, I want you to remember that most kids grow up just fine, right? Not only that, but we actually don't know how much of a role parenting plays in the outcome of your child. So there'll be things that I say that are disturbing or worrisome, or you'll go, oh my God, I did that. Does that mean this is going to happen to my kid? Maybe, maybe not. And you know, you have the most incredible lineup of speakers. I know most of them. But whoever speaks to you, do keep in mind that it is a very inexact science that says what percentage of your child is a function of how you parented. The thing is, it's the only thing we can control, right? So the genetics is a throw of the dice. A lot of life is a throw of the dice, as a matter of fact. Whether your kid is sitting next to a merit scholar or the cocaine dealer in the 11th grade, you know, there's all kinds of things that impact your child, and you're one of them. But you're the only one you can control. So we try and do the best we can. What's going on with kids in communities like this? Well, they don't look so good. And that's shocking, because the assumption has always been that if you had an involved parent and educational opportunities, you should have lower rates of emotional problems in kids, right? So nobody had so much as done a single study on kind of upper middle class kids ever until about a decade ago. And the way they started looking at upper middle class kids, and I don't mean necessarily rich kids, these were studies done on family income of about $140,000 a year. They started looking at it by accident because a woman named Sonia Luther, who was an expert on at-risk kids, inner city kids, decided to use kids from more affluent families as her control group, right? Because they were supposed to look good. They, you know, she's trying to get grant money, make the other kids look even worse. And it turned out, like great scientific discoveries, it's always by accident. And it turned out that the kids from more affluent homes, being what I said, about $140,000 a year, look much worse. Not on everything, but on several of the most significant indicators. They had much higher rates of depression, they had much higher rates of anxiety disorders, they had much higher rates of substance abuse, and they had much higher rates of psychosomatic disorders. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the bad news. I need to set the stage so that there's a context for what I'm saying. I've been going around the country for about 4 or 5 years now. I have been to Chicago more than to any other city in America. And I think the reason for that is that people here are genuinely concerned, they get it, they're interested, and I think the reason I'm still here is we haven't really figured out the answers. And so I really want to spend at least half the time tonight, not just telling you about the problem, but giving you some of my answers. And then, you know, it's not a million people in here, and then we can brainstorm a little bit about what might work in your community to lower some of these disturbing rates of emotional problems and other issues, which is things like lack of engagement with learning and kind of being disengaged and things like that. So kids in general, for many years, as long as I've been a psychologist, and that's a very long time, the greatest stressor in a teenager's life was, who wants to take a guess? God, I love this audience. Like, everybody talks. You know, usually I'm like, please, somebody say something. Okay, again. Home. I'm hearing people say home, yeah. For many, many decades, the greatest stressor in a kid's life was home, right? Mom and dad getting divorced, dad's beating mom up, somebody's throwing pots and pans at each other, you know, baby sister is getting all the attention. Whatever was going on in the house that was troubling was the most troubling thing for kids. Anybody want to take a guess on what the second most troubling thing for kids historically has been? School. Friends, right, peers. So it was family and peers for decades. Of course, the most troubling thing in a child's life, the greatest stressor, is now school. Right. So just a minute of background on myself. After The Price of Privilege became so popular, I started a project, co-founded a project at Stanford called Challenge Success. And we work with about 100 schools all over the country, and we're sort of educational reform and parent education. And we do a lot of research. And our research is consistent with many other people's research that shows that the number one stressor in kids' lives is school, and the part about school that's most stressful is grades and homework, right. And part of the issue about homework is that the research on homework is almost kind of over in the field of education. There's been so much homework research, and if you're interested personally, you can look at what's called a meta-analysis. That means a guy named Cooper took every study that was ever done on homework and sort of smushed them all together to come up with the results. And the results were that basically there's no cognitive advantage to homework in grade school. And he ended up sort of capitulating a little bit and saying, okay, 10 minutes a day, a grade, excuse me, were okay. Junior high school, 1 hour, and high school, 2 hours. And the idea was that after 2 hours, up to 2 hours, you would see advancement, right? So if your kid's doing 2 hours of homework a night, they're actually advancing their knowledge. If they're doing more than 2 hours a night, how many of your kids are doing more than 2 hours a night here? About half. Okay. So there's a real fall off in the benefit that they're getting after 2 hours. And after 2.5 hours, they're getting a real decrement in what they're learning. So, you know, this is one of the things we do a lot of at Challenge Success is try and bring homework policy into line with the research, with the science on homework. And that's a discussion that parents have with administrators and within their communities. So school is a very big stressor in kids' lives. Overscheduling comes up as a stressor, and I think it's misunderstood. Like, how many of you go to school, right, and you come home and like maybe your mom would be home and you'd have some cookies or something, and then you'd go out and play? I did. How many of you did? Yeah. And how did you know when it was time to come home? Right. It got dark. The street lights went on, right? So kids are pretty robust. You know, they can play for hours at a time and not suffer any ill effects. When they break down, what about overscheduling seems so toxic, it's not the hours that kids spend, because kids can spend many hours after school doing stuff. It's the amount of criticism that comes with the activity that's damaging to kids. So most kids, right, are doing competitive kinds of activities after school. And because of that, they come in for a fair amount of criticism. So personally, I wish there was more opportunities for kids to play after school, where I have 3 sons. I have 3 sons, that's my husband is the one. I'm kind of looking at that, what's that? So I know a fair amount of sports. There was like no opportunity at my kids' schools just to kind of run around and play basketball or play soccer. They were on traveling teams, they were on varsity teams, and it was very, very demanding. Did they love it? Actually, yeah, they did. And I think what you need to do with each of your children when you look at things like, is my kid doing too much homework? Or is my kid stressed? Or is my kid overscheduled after school? Is to look at your particular child, right? Because there are kids who do absolutely fine with 5 APs and they're the head of the varsity basketball team and they're not troubled at all. And then there are kids in that situation who are extremely troubled. So there isn't kind of a one-size-fits-all for kids. You have to talk to your kid, and if your kid is starting to show symptoms of stress, and by the way, for teenagers, first symptoms are usually psychosomatic. So if your kid has a stomach ache or headaches or can't sleep or that sort of thing, those are usually what we see first with kids. My book opens with a story about a young lady who comes to me. Mom calls in the morning and she's just frantic. You gotta see my daughter, you gotta see my daughter. So I see her and she drives up in some new model car that's a lot nicer than mine. And she's wearing this Cutter t-shirt, which is a shirt that's, if you read the book, you know the story, it's sort of low over her wrist. Don't know what a Cutter t-shirt is? Okay, so you should. It's a t-shirt that's pulled low over the wrist and it hides cutting on the arm. And so she's wearing that kind of shirt and she's just lovely, She comes in and she says to me, "Hello, Dr. Levine, it's a pleasure to meet you." So I know there's a problem because when you're 16, it's never a pleasure to meet a shrink. And finally I get her to roll up her sleeve, and what do I see? She's carved the word empty into her arm. And I'd really like to raise awareness of self-mutilation because the Ivy Leagues just did a study on self-mutilation at the Ivy Leagues. 17% of kids in the Ivy Leagues are self-mutilators. That's one, you see those view books, everybody wants their kid going to an Ivy League school, and you see the view books and they're sort of beautiful and wafting across the campus, and they never talk about the fact that 1 in 6 of them is going back and cutting themselves up as an anxiety management technique. So, any of you here who are sort of in the field or counselors, anything like that, when I was in training, and this is mostly girls, not entirely, but mostly girls, any girl who was a self-mutilator, this was what we call a pathognomonic sign. It meant that indicated a severe personality disorder, usually borderline personality disorder, and it was very worrisome. That's not the case anymore. The girls that I talk to in my office who self-mutilate are using it to release anxiety, and they're so clear when they talk about the fact that they feel less anxious when they cut. Maybe there's a little bit of a biological reason, you cut yourself, you release endorphins, that's a little, sort of kick to the brain, but there's also something about control in the same way that eating disorders have some element of control in them. But basically, it is a poor coping skill. And what I'm going to get to after I finish with the rest of the bad news is why I think this is going on, and it has a lot to do with coping skills that are inadequately developed in kids. Okay, so overscheduling, the issue is criticism. When I say the rates are disproportionate, just to give you a context, young children from comfortable communities like this, they do fine. There's nothing to indicate that their levels of depression, anxiety, bipolar, any of that stuff is higher. And to me, this is one of the most interesting things, and if anybody has thoughts on it, please talk to me afterwards, because there's something critically important to learn from the fact that at 8, your child's at no risk, no particular risk. And at 18, your child's at 3 times the risk. That's a big, big change. And when this research first started, I think the idea was, well, maybe these kinds of kids hit kind of a bump for a while, but God, they have so much going for them, they'll be fine. So the original research looked at girls in 7th grade, which is the break point. Below 7th grade, didn't see much of anything unusual. 7th grade, you started to see higher rates, twice the rate of depression. And then the feeling was, okay, we're going to follow those kids because I betcha that by the time they're juniors or seniors in high school, they're going to look better. Well, by the time they were juniors and seniors in high school, it wasn't twice the rate of depression, it was 3 times the rate of depression. So there's something going on over the high school years that is making kids incredibly vulnerable to things like depression. And you know, it's half empty, half full. The rate of depression, not dysphoria, which is like crabbiness, or your daughter's rolling her eyes and shutting the door in your face. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about clinical depression is 22% for 11th grade girls. So that's like 1 out of 4 or 5 girls has signs of clinical depression, and 1 out of 10 is functionally impaired. 10% of high school girls are not getting out of bed, can't do their work, functionally impaired. So those are really high rates. They're climbing. Suicide, and I don't want to spend much time at all on suicide because it's a very complicated topic. It's my only criticism of Race to Nowhere is, and Vicki knows it well, I don't like the fact that it made it seem like this girl suicided around a single grade. That may happen, it has never happened in my experience. I spent 30 years seeing kids, thank God I haven't had a suicide, but I participated in lots of sort of post sessions around suicides in my county, and the reasons for suicide are very complicated. On the other hand, the suicide rate for girls 10 to 14 is up for the first time in decades by 78%. 78%. By hanging, by the way. Most common thing is by hanging. So 10 to 14, it's up 78%, and 15 to 18, it's up about 35%. So, you know, okay, that's like the bad news. The bad news is that all these rates of psychological disorders are escalating. And the thing that's scary about it is, like the young lady who says to me, it's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Levine. You know, if I was a brand new therapist and didn't know much, I'd say, well, she looked fine. Because all the things that we were taught, or you may have been handed, like by the pediatrician, look for these signs of depression: failing grades, poor hygiene, withdrawal from friends and family. Well, I didn't see that. I'm not seeing that in my kids. I didn't see that in this young lady, and we just finished a study at Stanford looking at kids who were actively suicidal to see whether or not there was a drop in grades. Because it's the first question that, as a psychologist, you ask when somebody says a kid's depressed. You go, well, how are they doing in school and how are they doing with their friends? And you used to get, oh, their grades are in the toilet. Now, what we found at this particular study at Stanford was that there was no decrement in grades among the kids who were actively suicidal, which is very scary to me personally, because as a clinician, it's kind of like, okay, I can, you know, I get depression. I can figure that out when a kid's depressed. Like I said, I haven't had a kid suicide yet in my practice. I could now much more easily, because it's much harder to know the sign. And, you know, this young lady was beautifully groomed and had good social skills. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that in communities that are, you know, relatively comfortable, looking good is really important. And so these kids have kind of learned a variety of social skills that stand them in good stead when they're feeling well, and can also be a protection when they're not feeling well. So, you know, we like I said, we like to look good, right? We get dressed well, you know, not in the middle of the week especially, but we get dressed well. Gilda knows I've been wearing the same clothes for 3 days. That's what that joke came from. You know, we spend a lot of time trying to decide between, I don't know, Navajo white and, you know, Indian white, right? Antique white on all walls. You have no idea what I'm talking about. it's like the ladies are smiling and the guys are like, what? They're just paint colors, you know, it's just spending time making things looking good. And so these kids have learned to look good even in the face of real distress. And I think part of the answer to that is you really do have to pay more attention to your kid. It is not going to be as patently clear when your child is in trouble as it used to be. And that means spending more time, knowing their friends better. One of the things we found is protective, and this is important because we don't have that many protective factors, but dinner with your kids is a protective factor. How many of you here have dinner at least several times a week with your family? I can't tell you. You know, I usually get like 6 hands. Like, good for you, because that is the #1 protective factor in terms of depression, anxiety disorders, substance abuse, and early pregnancy, is having dinner 5 or more times a week with your kids. Now, I don't actually think it has to be dinner. You know, the research has all been done on dinner, so then they say you have to have dinner 5 times a week. I think it's simply having some time on a daily basis where you say we're a family, what's going on with you. And like, my husband's a eye surgeon, and so he would come home late often, but we always had dinner together, and so I talked to people about what that was like, but sometimes it was 9 o'clock at night, and how did you do that with little kids? And I don't know, they grazed nachos or something before he came home, and then we sat down and ate together. And what you need to do is sort of set aside that time that says, I'm interested in what is going on in your life. And if you think, I used to get dinged a lot on this, oh, like, you know, that's so superior of you to say that. It didn't mean that there was brilliant conversation at my table every night. You know, I had 3 sons. There was like a lot of grunting. But there were also days where there was a lot of really, really good conversation, and I knew what my kids were doing. So that's one protective factor that's really important. The other one, by the way, is what we call monitoring. You know, like psychologists have all these words for just normal things, like paying attention. We call it monitoring. And so they have found out that knowing where, with who, and when your child was going out throughout high school is a significant protective factor. So the next time your kid says, you know, your kid's taking the car and he's 17 and you say, where are you going, honey? And he goes, if he's crabby, none of your business. And if he's compliant, he says, oh, I'm not really sure. And you know, and you don't get the answer. Your answer is, well, you're really not going out until I have those answers. I am shocked at the kinds of questions I've been asked over the last couple of days that seem to me so obvious. Like, I'm going to give you an example. So, and I will not tell you which community. My child is on the internet at 2 in the morning. What should I do? That was one. I got one that was, my child is texting at 2 in the morning. What should I do? And I'm like, really? You're really paying me to come here to tell you what to do if your child's like, take the phone away, right? You know? So I think there's been this swing. We're going to talk about the tiger mom versus the cuddling mom, but there's been this swing around privacy. It's another phone call I get. This is my favorite phone call. You get a little weird when you've been doing this a long time. So my favorite phone call is, Dr. Levine, I was putting away my kids' laundry this morning and I found cocaine in their drawer. What should I do? And it's like, really, cocaine is pretty serious. I think you better do something about it. And the answer always is, but I broke their trust by going into their drawers. And it's like, you know what? If your kid overdoses on cocaine, you have no kid, therefore the issue of trust is completely irrelevant. Your first job is to make sure your child's safe. Your first job. So this business, like around monitoring, where your kid is, who they're going to be with, and what time they're coming home. And does that mean you'll always get the truth? No. Does that mean sometimes they'll say they're here and then they end up going there and then of course. But it sets the stage in the house for saying, I care about what's happening to you, I'm paying attention to what's happening to you, and you and I have a collaborative relationship. You want to go out and use the car? Fine, I want to know where you're going. And this sort of setting of collaborative relationships is really important between parents and teenagers, because you're going to have a lot of different ideas about a lot of different things. The other thing that I think has contributed to the stressors in adolescence is our mistaken notions about better, what's better. Earlier is better, faster is better, more is better. It's sort of this high pressure, high stakes culture. I was really happy to see that Disney, anybody use Baby Einstein with their children? Anybody? Yeah. Okay, you can all get a refund from Disney? Yeah, no, really, you can. And an apology as well. Because Baby Einstein was found, Baby Einstein were these videos that were used supposedly to accelerate language development in kids, right? In fact, what the research found was it retards language acquisition by 16% per month. So for those of you who used it, don't worry too much about it. I'm sure there were a bunch of other things you did besides just put your baby in front of Baby Einstein. But it's a great example of how the notions about faster and better and earlier are out of sync with development, and usually somebody stands to gain financially from them. All those claims were not only false and misleading, they were actually dangerous to children below the age of 2. If you were over 2 and your kid watched it, it didn't help them at all, but it didn't harm them. But under 2, it slowed down language. So, I want to make a case for kids have 1,000,000 jobs to manage and navigate and meet. And, we're grown-ups and we sometimes forget about adolescence. People sort of have a vague idea of what their adolescence was like, and it usually involves something pretty embarrassing, or, drugs, or, stuff you don't even want to think about anymore, and you certainly don't want to tell your kid about. But that's what adolescence is. Adolescence has certain developmental tasks. For the most part, girls are out of puberty, boys are still in puberty early in high school, and puberty is the only time, we used to think adolescence was Sturm und Drang and kids were so difficult and crabby and all this kind of stuff. None of that's true. The only time that it is true is in puberty. So those 2 years where your kids are really hormone flooded, they are more difficult and they are more moody, and they're trying. Do you remember what it was like to try and go up to the blackboard when you had a boner? Does anybody remember that? Guys here, so. So that's a really challenging task when you're a 13-year-old boy. And there are similar challenging tasks for 13-year-old girls. And then you have to make relationships with people, right? And by the end of high school, you have to learn what it means to be intimate with people. And we're so totally out of line with children's development. I don't know that they're popular anymore. Anybody know the Ames and Ilg books? Your 5-year-old sunny and a pain in the ass, and your 6-year-old cheerful and crabby, and no, are they popular anymore? Okay, well, when my kids were growing up, they were like the Bible. And so I looked at one the other day for 8-year-olds, and it said, by 8 years old, your child should freely roam the neighborhood. Really. Now, probably in April, I think it was, in April, Dan Pink and I did something together in San Francisco, and we asked a group of about 1,000 parents at what age would they let their child roam the neighborhood. And the average answer was, what do you think? I'm hearing 12, 13, 14. Is that sort of where I'm, yeah. The average answer we got was 13-ish, something like that. So, like, here's the reality. The age of first sexual intercourse in America is 16. Your child needs more than 3 years between crossing the street and getting laid. And all this incredible protectiveness around, you know, it's dangerous out there. The reality is that violent crime is down 50% from when you grew up the 70s. Down 50%. So people's reluctance to let their kids outside is really a function of their own anxiety. It is not a function of FBI statistics, that's for sure. Okay, so those are some of the things that I think are contributing to sort of these high rates of problems among kids. Now, you know, that thing about crossing the street is funny, but it's also true, and it also points to a lack of coping skills, and that's what I think is at the heart of so many of these problems. Is, well, why should these kids have difficulty? It doesn't make any sense, you know. I mean, look at this room. It's filled with people who are concerned about their children, and they have educational opportunities that most kids don't have. Why in the world are they having high rates of emotional problems? And I think the reason is that because there is such an incredible emphasis on one arena of development, which is their academic performance, and a neglect of the fact that there are many, many tasks to be accomplished in high school and junior high school. Well, there's many tasks to be accomplished throughout life. You know, is there anybody in this audience who hasn't had, you know, some tragedy? A parent died, a child died, financial troubles, a divorce, marital problems. Raise your hand if you've never had any of those things in your life. Go ahead. If you haven't, go right ahead. Okay, so we have one person out of, you know, 250. That's life. Life is going to hit your kids just the way it hit you. And, you know, my kids are all sort of grown. But my baby just left college last year. And there is an unbelievable realization when you realize you will not always be there for your children. It is unbelievably difficult and painful, and but it's true. And so our job is really to prepare our children slowly and over time to be able to manage themselves, to set up their own families, to be able to cope with life on their own. And in order to do that, they have to develop coping skills. So I've just written some of the coping skills. I have a new book coming out in about 9 months, and these are the coping skills I put in it. But they're, you know, you can add or subtract or add some of your own, but these are important for a reason to me. Because I'm an adolescent psychologist, self-control, you asked me to pick one coping skill for teenagers, it's going to be self-control. And here's the reality. If your kid doesn't have good self-control, they will come up, if they don't have healthy self-control, they will come up with an unhealthy answer for frustration. So one of the things that I think is important is create a little bit of necessity in your child's life. Something people often, including myself, find incredibly difficult to do with their kids. What? You know, make life hard for my kid? You gotta be kidding me. So if you don't do that, you'll have an experience like this. My oldest kid goes off to college, and he's pretty independent. My kid's quite independent, and I'm very proud, right? You know, it's like, oh, he didn't call us the first day, and I'm going to my husband, wow, he did such a good job. He didn't call us the second day, he didn't call us the third day. On the fourth day, he calls, his name's Lauren, and he says to me, Ma, you know that number you always used to call when we needed somebody else's phone number? What was that? And I'm like, and I get it. I know it's 411 that he wants, and I get why he doesn't know it, because every time he would yell down the hall, hey, Ma, I want a pizza, what's the number? I would go, oh, honey, let me do it for you, I'll get it for you, right? So he never really learned 411. So I hang up the phone with him, and then I think about it for a minute, and I call him right back, and I go, oh my God, Lauren, do you know about 911? So now, did that ruin my son? My son is now a lawyer in San Francisco, and he's just fine. But no, it didn't ruin him at all. An 18-year-old should have known 411. It made him younger than he needed to be, right? And it gave him less options. That's a pretty benign story. It gave him less options for problem solving. I was on the Stanford campus the other week, I guess, and there's a young lady, they're getting ready to start school, and there's a young lady, and she's obviously a little confused in front of me. I'm not that close to her, and she's gone, the story is she's gone to her first class, and she doesn't remember where her second class is. So what does she do? She calls her mother in Asia. 16 time zones away. 16 time zones away. And, you know, I've thought about that story a lot, because part of me feels like, well, okay, she solved the problem. Like, you know, why are you being so prickly about it? And she did solve the problem, but she didn't optimize her resources. What if mom's not home? What if the cell phone's dead? What if there's a blackout in China? You know, I don't know. But it's not turning back on herself to find an answer for something. It's turning outward. And this is what I see. Now, of course, I see a particular group of kids. I only see kids who are in trouble. So I get a little bit of a distorted view of teenagers. But what I see in all of the teenagers that I do treat is a disproportionate reliance on other people to problem solve, to fix things, to help them, to finish their homework. You know, cheating is 95% now. That's another Stanford study. You can look all the statistics if you're interested on our website. It's www.challengesuccess.org. 95% of kids are cheating, and of the highest achieving kids, it's 100%. So you have most cheating among your smartest kids. I just came from New York recently, and you know, it's like, this is true. A tutor on the Upper East Side of New York gets $1,000 an hour. If you want to move there, we can set up our own stuff. $1,000 an hour. And I did I just didn't believe it. So I was doing a little focus group with a bunch of moms. So this is one of the Hill schools in New York. I can't name which one, but there's not that many. And so I went to the principal, the headmaster, excuse me, and I said, you know, they told me that, like, right, that's bullshit, right? And he said, no, that's exactly right. They bring in, you know, NASA, retired NASA guys and military generals and stuff like that. And who did they bring them in for? The kid who's having trouble? No. The A- student, right? So that they can become an A student. So, yeah, I'm not sure why I told you that story. I think it just sticks in my head all the time. Well, it had to do with depending on the outside world, right? Depending on other people to fix things for you, to make things better. I'm from California. The state system, the state university system, which at one time was, you know, sort of the nation's best state university system, used to take 12% of top performing kids in the state. I think we're down to about 8%, but we're still taking this narrow group of really high performing students. 50% of them need remediation in either math or English when they enter college. Now, what does that mean, that the top 10% of kids need remediation? It means that they're not really learning. These kids are going through the motions, They know how to game the system. They know how to pull an A on a test and forget it all the next day. And then when they get tested, they get to Cal, or they get to Cal Poly, or they get to any one of the schools and get tested, they don't remember anything. That's not learning for a lifetime. That is, as my co-founder Denise Pope has a book called Doing School. That's doing school, and it doesn't set kids up for a lifetime of real learning. Okay, I want to talk for a minute about this business about the Tiger Mom, because I get asked about it a lot, and I wrote the editorial for the San Francisco paper on it. The thing about it that's disturbing to me is not so much what she had to say, which was disturbing enough in its own right, but what the media did with it, which was to absolutely bifurcate Tiger moms and the rest of us coddling, liberal, wimpy, wussy moms. And as if Tiger moms really appreciated that you had to work very hard, and it was all about practice, and it was all about you. And moms like me, or I suspect most of you, just were afraid of your children and thought they were really fragile and stuff like that. And I actually don't think that's the case. I mean, I think that there was more in common than meets the eye there. I think what happened was it was a slow news week. It was just a couple weeks before that the PISA, the international testing, had come out and showed us really lagging behind. And for those of you who have any interest in this or follow it at all, let me just tell you that this country has never done well on that testing, ever. As a matter of fact, the first time the testing was used, and I can't remember the year, we came in 13 out of 14 in the world. So this notion that all of a sudden we're just falling apart is simply not true. And besides, that's not what America does well. America doesn't do test taking as well as some other countries that have a 1,000-year history of test taking. So Deborah Stipek, who's Dean of Education, that's the department I'm in, goes to China, and she says after the conference, the Minister of Education and those people always get her in a corner and say, you know, we're very good at taking tests, but how do we innovate? Our kids don't create anything. So, you know, I sort of don't like the fact that this was cast as a, you know, it's Asians versus the rest of us, it's moms who really know how to parent versus moms who are wusses. None of that's true. We're all trying to do the best for our kids, and we have some differences of opinion in terms of whose life it actually belongs to. So I would argue that all the we's I hear in my office, we're taking 4 AP classes. We're going to Northwestern. We made the varsity team. I thought you finished high school. You know? So I think there's a real need to separate out your own dreams and hurts and aspirations from those of your children. And I think in many ways this is our most challenging job. Because of course, you know, of course we expose children to the things we like. Of course, you know, if you're like a real music nut, then there's music in your house. Do you have to make your kid practice 4 hours a day? I would argue, like David Brooks did, who I thought wrote the best response to Amy Chua. He said, practicing piano 4 hours a day is a piece of cake compared to navigating the social structure of a sleepover for 12-year-olds. Right? And he's right. And he's absolutely right. Especially when every business leader, because don't ask me why, I get asked to talk to businesses like I know nothing about business, but every business leader says flexibility, creativity, innovation, collaboration, over and over and over again. Collaboration. So those are the things that are going to count, because we don't even know half the jobs that are going to exist. You know, no, you didn't mention, I guess yesterday, they mentioned these other books that I wrote I wrote a couple books, probably 15 years ago, on the media, and there is not a single reference to social networking or Facebook or any, because none of it existed. This is only like 15 years ago. It was maybe 20, almost 20. So the speed of change is phenomenal. And instead of just content, and instead of what No Child Left Behind has wrought, which I think it's done an enormous amount of damage, I think kids need to be exposed to classes that help them develop the skills that people say are going to be necessary. Collaboration, project-based learning. One of the things we do in Challenge Success has 100 schools around the country. We do project-based learning, we do different forms of assessment, we do climate of care, and we do one other thing which I'll think of in a minute. But you know, there should be alternate assessments. Every kid is different. I started to say, when I started this rant, about seeing the child in front of you and appreciating that child and not letting your history get in the way. And I'm going to suggest that when our history gets in the way, it comes often from wounds of our own. So, you know, here's my story. So I have 3 boys. My first 2 kids were great students and fit the triarchic theory of intelligence, like practical, creative, analytic. So my oldest boy is a lawyer, analytics, straight A's, you know, the whole 9 yards. And when he graduated from high school, I don't know what you do here, but he was decorated head to foot in gold. You know, he's got gold tassels and gold this and gold across his back, and he's walking up there. You know, he looks like the king. And I can't tell you the number of student-athlete breakfasts and dinner I went to for him, and you know, dean's list and blah, blah, blah. And he's a great kid. But that was Lauren when he walked across the stage. My middle son has been on the theater stage since he was 5. That's his passion in life. For those of you who have kids like that, prepare yourself. I just spoke to my son right before I came here. A month ago, he was co-directing Company at Lincoln Center with Neil Patrick Harris and Lupone and Stephen Colbert. And this week, he's handing out flyers for Banana Republic. And that's what that life is. So, and he loves it. Loves it. So it's an honor for me to have kids who are so different. My third kid, though, was not a good student and had a learning disability. And so Lauren had all this stuff, the lawyer had all this stuff, and don't tell my kids I talk this way, because my middle son, the creative one, hates it. He says, every time you put us into a pigeonhole, if I'm the creative child, I can't be the smart child. And the smart child can't be the creative. He said, I hate it now. So don't tell them I said it. It's just shorthand, you know, because you don't really want to hear everything about my children. And the middle kid, when he graduates, he's got a lot of gold stuff on him because he was a really good student, but he couldn't care less because he's the creative child, and he's taken his robe and turned it into a suit somehow. I don't know, you know, he's sewed it up the middle and stuff like that. He doesn't care. But my youngest kid has nothing on his robe. And this is really when this became a mission for me more than just a profession for me. So my youngest kid, whose name is Jeremy, was I was going to say mediocre student. He wasn't. He was an average student. He was 50 in the class, right in the middle of the class. In my community, that's a failure. That's the kind of community I live in. So he walks up and he has nothing on his, not nothing on, he has nothing on his robe. And all I can think of is because he's the hands-on kid, he worked construction every summer. And they got paid $12 an hour. They'd be a team. And all the guys on his team were Hispanic because I'm in California. And they all made the same amount of money, which was $12 an hour. And he couldn't understand how these guys who had families could live on $12 an hour. So this kid got up every morning at 5 in the morning to make lunch for his whole team. Thanks. I tell that story story just for that. I lived for that. No, but the point was, when he graduated, nothing, right? Nothing. He walks up there, he looks bare next to everybody else, because his strength, which is interpersonal, which is compassion, which is kindness, is not recognized. And it's possible to make that just as much a part of education, and it should be just as much a part of education as how you did on the math SATs. And there are schools in this country that I've been fortunate enough to visit. There's one I just adore called Wildwood in Los Angeles. You walk into their lobby, and in addition to the honor roll, they have the honor roll there. They have sculpture and photography and art and human-powered vehicles on the ceilings and weavings, and you walk in and what it says is, in this place, every kind of talent and interest and capacity and skill is valued. And I think that we have to work a little bit harder on making kids feel that they're valued. I see far too many, especially boys, who ask a boy to sit still for a whole day can sometimes be really challenging. They tend to be a little more motoric. So you ask them to sit still all day long. That's hard to begin with. They're not as verbal as girls are for the most part. They like to work with their hands, and none of that finds much validation in school, and so they end up smoking dope behind the gym because they don't feel valued. And I think, there's a lot of discussion now about tracking for different crafts and professions and all this kind of stuff. I don't know how I feel yet about any of that, but I do wish there were more opportunities in high schools for kids to be able to shine in a variety of skills. And I have to tell you, quite frankly, because Gilda told me that APs are important here, that academic excellence is really important. But personally, I am interested in most kids. And so, we end up, particularly in some of the communities like I just came from, we end up with everybody in the room thinking their kid is on the bell curve out here, right? It's 2 standard deviations from the mean. Every kid in the school. That's just not the way it is. It's just not the way it is. And so most of our kids, what most kids don't know, the secret that I think adults keep from kids, is that when you're an adult, you go to your right. Basketball fans, anybody? Is that a basketball expression? You go to your right, you go to your strength, right? So it's actually easy for me to stand up here and do this. I love it, it's fun for me. I was at Loyola yesterday, and my friend Lonnie was with me, and before I started talking, the gal said to me, go to the restroom before, and Lonnie says, no, you can't send her to the restroom by herself. She'll get lost, because when I spoke at New Trier, I kept the audience waiting 15 minutes. I'm wandering around this, I must have been in Skokie. I don't know where I was. So, isn't that true for all of us, that we do what we're good at, and we're okay at a bunch of things and kind of crummy at other things? And so this notion of straight A's, if you want to go to whatever school it is, you have to have straight A's. Maybe. There are some kids who can get straight A's. Every child the bar should be high. I'm not in any way saying the bar shouldn't be high, but it needs to be the right bar for that kid. So that means you have to know that kid's capacity, and that kid's skill, and that kid's interest. And I used to be the consultant at a Jewish day school in Marin County. And in my contract every year was written that I would be allowed to give a talk on the average child. And I did it for 3 years. Nobody ever came. That's serious. Nobody ever. In all of Marin County, the entire Jewish population, there was not one single average child. So, I think what I'm pushing for a little bit is an appreciation of a wide range of skills in your children. And if you can do that, it it's really a blessing for you because it allows you into worlds that you don't inhabit. So my oldest kid, it was easy to sort of debate and argue and do stuff like that. But Jeremy, the one with learning disability, he didn't have to take language because he had trouble with languages, but he decided to take sign language because you do that in space and he would be good at it. So I did it with him because I thought it would be like interesting. And so a year later, like he's fluent signer, and I can say my name with great difficulty a year later, right? So it was a great experience actually for him to see that I wasn't good at everything and that he was much better than I was at certain things. Because remember, your kids think you're good at everything, and I think it's really important to let them know that even adults have strengths and weaknesses. There's a little bit of change in how people think about learning disabilities. You know, it used to be all of our attention went to remediation. I was talking to somebody about this today. And remediation is really important, but probably what's more important is finding those child's strengths and playing to their strengths. Because learning disability is likely to be there for most of their life or for their life. What you want to do is figure out what their strengths are. And I had a very funny experience. I was down in Santa Barbara. I got invited by the Orfalea Foundation, Paul Orfalea, who started Kinko's. And I get off the plane and he's waiting for me, right? And he comes up to me, I can't even do it because I'm not put together. Hi, Dr. Levine, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm so happy you're here. I'm so happy. Do you know I have ADD? It's like, really? No, I did not know. I didn't know that. You know, and that's how he speaks. He had ADD. He was a very mediocre student. The best social skills imaginable. He'd meet me at the plane, right? He takes me to the hotel. The day after I speak, he sends me flowers. I mean, it's very easy to understand how this guy was a successful businessman. And what he talks about is his parents really appreciated his social skills, and they were sort of like, do your best in school. And so they fostered, what you can do is either complain about what your kid has trouble with, or you can foster their strengths. And I'm not saying, you know, raise your kid up or tell them they have to do their homework or help them practice. I think everybody does do that. Sometimes I think we forget to pay attention to the kinds of strengths that in the real world count for so much. And that goes back a little bit to, remember I said like young kids don't have emotional problems at any higher rates, but the teenagers do. And when I try and think about why that is, what we pay attention to in young kids versus older kids, one of the things I think about is, you know, you have a young child, right, a toddler, let's say, and that toddler's just learning to walk. So she takes a couple steps, and she falls down, she looks right at you, right? She wants to see, are you like, oh my God? Or you get up, honey, try it again, right? Because she'll get up again if you're not freaking out. So she takes a couple more steps, she falls down again, you go, come on, honey, falls down again. And you would never say to that child, you keep falling down like that, you're gonna be flipping burgers for the rest of your life. But we say that all the time in one form or another to kids. Really? Is that the best you can do? You know where you're going to end up. It's a threat, right? The community college is a threat. It's one of the biggest mistakes we make is to make community college a threat. Community colleges are a tremendous resource. I don't know what's happening with them here. Are they being cut the way they are? No? Okay. That's not a threat, it's a chance for kids who had difficulties to sort of get in an environment where they do well. And this is a place where I have a lot of personal stuff. So my kid who had the language disability didn't go to a school like his brothers went to, didn't go to school you'd know. It was the exact right school for him. And it's 2 years later, he's been offered multiple jobs. How do you turn a C student into an A student? You teach to them the way they can learn, and you teach to them what they're interested in. And then all of a sudden they're not C students anymore. I mean, it's just an unbelievable transformation. So when your kid is getting ready for college, pay careful attention to your kid's strengths and weaknesses, to what kind of environment your child thrives in. Forget about it being where you went to college, where your name, why can't you be like my sister's daughter? She got a free ride to, Yale, or forget all of that. Your child will do well in the environment that's suited to their style of learning and to their personality. And the research, again, is on an undergraduate level, where you go to school makes very little difference. Not quite the same on a graduate level. But like Yale looked at kids who were accepted to Yale, those who went, those who didn't go. Mom was sick, they didn't have the money, whatever. 20 years later, did they look different? Not at all. It was about the kid. So for the right kid, Yale's a great school. But for the wrong kid, it's absolutely toxic. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. And I've had kids, this one girl who I just was crazy about, and she was a B student at a private school, and her guidance counselor said to her, kids like you are a dime a dozen. And it was just mind-boggling to me. It's the exact antithesis of see the kid in front of you and support them and celebrate them in their strengths. Okay. I think one of the things that helps us as parents is when we're trying to make decisions about our kids, one, that we tolerate mistakes. Not only tolerate mistakes, but encourage mistakes. I had a meeting with several, I'm right near Silicon Valley, so I got to talk to all those guys. And, they all had failures. Every one of them had a failure, multiple failures, many of them. And they all said they never would be where they were, except for Zuckerberg, who didn't have much of a failure. But most of them feel they wouldn't be where they are if they didn't make mistakes. And what I see with kids is such an inhibition around learning, because it's like, I can't take that course. I'm not going to get an A in it, and it'll bring down my GPA. Carol Dweck's work. Was she here when she came out? No. So Carol Dweck does a lot of research on what makes kids push themselves to learn. And of course what she finds out is that kids do best when they're not overly praised, right? So you take one group of kids and you tell them how smart they are and they're just brilliant and they can solve anything. You take another group of kids and don't tell them anything and let them loose with puzzles. Who does the harder puzzles? It's the kids who haven't been set up to feel that so much of their identity is tied up in getting it right. If you always have to get it right, which is the exact opposite of innovation, right? How do you innovate if you don't try a whole bunch of different things, some of which will be right, some of which will be wrong? So her findings are that kids do best at a 50-50 challenge, where they have a 50% chance of being able to solve the problem successfully or not. And what you hear from kids is, in my office, I would never take that because there's a 50% chance I'll fail and it'll affect my GPA and I won't be able to go to the school I want to go to. And somebody yesterday asked me a question that I haven't stopped thinking about. He said, well, what about the influx of foreign students who are, if we listened to you, Dr. Levine, and we didn't push quite as much, and we developed the whole child a little bit more, aren't the foreign kids just going to take our kids' spots? And there's some truth in what he says, because there is a big influx. Part of it's financial, because, for example, in California, if you're from another country, you pay full tuition as opposed to a reduced tuition. And there's some truth in what he says. So I've been thinking about it a lot, and then I thought, well, if that meant that my kid spent his whole life studying and didn't develop the kind of compassion that I think is part of being alive, the kind of relationships that I think is part of being alive, I'm not willing to I wouldn't make that choice for him. It's not my choice to make. But what we emphasize carries over to our kids. And so if this guy was saying your kid's going to be knocked down a notch, And I was trying, and I still am playing with it. I'm still trying to figure out, well, what if my kid was knocked down a notch, but had a childhood and was well adjusted? I think I'd take the being knocked down a notch. And I'm not in the least bit convinced that it means he has to be knocked down a notch. I actually think a healthy kid is much more likely ultimately to do well than a kid who has never tested themselves, has never been challenged. And I think the mistake we make, and I'm going to wind up with this, is we think of success very, very short term. So when I talk to parents, their concern is, my kid just didn't get into whatever it is, you know, honors something or another. And in the moment, that seems incredibly important to that parent. And there, you know, no parent comes in and with bad intentions. Every parent has good intentions, and parents are very anxious now. I mean, the economy's horrendous. Young kids are out of jobs in droves. There's good reason to be anxious. But I think that it's really important not to let that anxiety get the better of us, and to sort of bear in mind that no matter how successful your child is, if they're not healthy, if they don't have coping skills, if they don't have these skills, I can tell you what they will have. They will turn to substance abuse, which is the majority of the kids that I see. They will cut, they will have eating disorders, they will deal, they will do a whole, because everybody needs coping skills, right? It's not like you get to have coping skills or not. You get to have healthy coping skills or unhealthy coping skills. And so, you know, in my best of all possible worlds, there's an awful lot of attention paid to self-esteem, and by that I don't mean you're so terrific, I mean competence, because we feel good when we can do something well. And that's my thing about broaden the range of things that your kid can be good at. They will have poor coping skills if they don't have good coping skills. I had just said we think of success in too short a time frame. When you go home, I'm going to stop in a minute, we'll do Q&A. It's kind of like, don't think about success today. Don't think about success this year. Think about what you would like your child to look like at 30 or at 35 when they're out in the world and they're making a contribution and they're in a relationship. Because what success is today is just, it's so easy to get caught into that as if it's really meaningful. You know, how many of you remember your social studies grade from 10th grade? There's always somebody who says, I remember Dr. Levine. Nobody here remembers. I mean, the point is, those things are easily forgotten. Compassion, connection, integrity, collaboration, self-esteem, self-efficacy, a good work ethic, all those things are lifelong acquisitions. And whether you got a B+ or a B in 10th grade history will fade into one's history, just like it's faded into all of yours. So I think, the issue of what success is comes up all the time, but I think our timeline for it is just way too short. So when you go home and think about that issue, think about it 15 years out from now, because you will find that you're developing different skills than if you're only thinking about it to the end of the semester. Okay, I'm going to stop right there so that I have some time to take questions and answers. Thank you. And anytime those of you who have kids and have to go, well, you all have kids. You can be here. Go ahead. Yeah.
Guidelines to encourage that. I think it's, I can see one weird things there, but we've had other speakers come and kind of beat us up a little bit about the lack of work ethic that our generation of kids has. And, I think mean,
Yeah.
we all feel like we need to mow the lawns and do different things, and our kids, nobody does that.
Right, and so that's a big problem, that, you know, if you talk to people in business, it's a huge problem in terms of who they're hiring. And there isn't, I talk to kids a lot of the time, the question was, what about work ethic? Did everybody hear? What about work ethic? Kids don't have much of a work ethic. There isn't a kid that I speak to when I do these groups in America who doesn't know the fastest way out of any responsibility. And that is the fastest way out. Honey, dinner's over. Honey, could you load the dishwasher? Oh, Mom, I have my honors chemistry test tomorrow. Oh, honey, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Go study, right? And there is so much more to be gained from discharging that responsibility than from the 5 minutes more of studying that she would do for that test. So I mean, this opens a big area for me. So I'm going to talk about it for a minute, and then I'd like to hear other people comment on it. I think that we've become fearful of disciplining our children. And I think that that comes from a whole variety of reasons, and I think it's particularly notable in more comfortable communities where people are very busy, often guilty, often working, often not home, and so they don't want to spend time with their kid engaged in, I told you to make the bed, I don't want to. Well, I told you to make it so you're not going anywhere till it's made. Well, screw you. And, you know, that you don't want that if you've been away all day. The reality is that parenting has two sides. Parenting always has two sides. It's got the delicious side, the loving side, you know, the hugs. Well, hugs. For those of the women with boys, right? You know, the hugs, like don't touch my junk. You know, that's the easy side of parenting. The tough side is you will go back and finish your work. You will mow the lawn. You don't get privileges unless this is done. And part of it, I think, and this is just speculation on my part, is that we're lonely. People who live comfortably, like I said earlier, we like to look good. We don't like being vulnerable particularly, which means it's really hard to go to your next door neighbor and say, my kid is having a problem with drugs. We don't do that. So the families become very insular and very tight, and you know, often the husbands are, that's why I'm so impressed with the guy turnout today. The husbands are typically gone a lot of the time, the women are lonely, and they simply can't afford to sort of lay down the rules with their kids. And as a result, you have kids who are just slacking off, and in the real world, this will serve them very, very poorly. I can't tell you how many businesses I've spoken to that says, I will not hire this kind of kid. I've never seen a work ethic like this. The mother comes to the salary negotiation. No, really. L'Oreal has a room for parents when they're interviewing their children. They're not children. Every university now has a program for parents so that like they can get you off campus instead of hanging around. So there's way too much of the wrong thing and not enough of the right thing is what I think, for a whole bunch of complicated reasons. Does anybody have, yeah?
I have a quick question, a little bit different subject.
Okay.
Something that seems to be a little bit more popular is this concept of a gap year.
Uh-huh.
I'm just curious what you think of that, because you have some innovative thinking about education.
Do I have innovative thinking?
No, you seem to have innovative thinking about education. What do you think of the gap year?
I love the gap year for the right child. The one issue I have with the gap year is the kid who says, I'm taking a year off. There's like three, in my practice I see three reasons to take a gap year. A kid who really needs a gap year, and it's a really good idea. A kid who has not done well in school and is so demoralized that they say, I'm not going to college, and walk in every day feeling as crappy as I felt in high school. And often those kids, and they're often boys, do really well by taking a year and working and doing well at working and being recognized for being responsible and stuff. And then I see, because I'm in a very affluent area, kids who go, I just need a year off. And I don't know what I'm going to do. And for those kids, it's a bad idea because it just feeds into their sense of entitlement that whatever they want to do. But in general, I'm very supportive of the gap year for the right kid. Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Yeah.
I wonder if you could say something about the role of sleep. Sleep has become linked to so many illnesses of various kinds, and certainly in the high-performing kids that I see, the amount of sleep that they're getting is just less than many adults that I know.
Right.
It just seems to be so cool.
Thank you. It's like you're my plant. I appreciate it. So, do you see kids professionally or no? This is just an observation. All right, so the American Academy of Pediatrics says your kids need 9 hours and 15 minutes of sleep a night for optimal performance. How many of them get 9 hours and 15 minutes of sleep a night? Okay, 5%. 5%. The other 95% aren't. So what have they found out about sleep deprivation? They found out a million things. It's a huge project right now, but in terms of cognitive development, we know that kids who don't get enough sleep can't consolidate, their memory consolidation is poor. And this is back to the why 50% of the kids who are high performing need remediation. Can't consolidate memory, short-term memory is impaired, right? So there's a whole bunch of physiologic things that are happening when kids are sleep deprived. By the way, as careful as we are about drinking and driving, right? For those of you with kids who drive, don't you have an entire thing about, like I did with my kids, you know, no drinking and driving, but if you ever find yourself in that, here's the cab number, I'll pick you up, no questions asked. We had an entire thing around it. A kid who is sleep deprived is deprived at the same level as if they had 2 shots of scotch. And we don't think about that. We send them off every day in a car, and the last set of statistics I looked at, fatigue was just as prominent a factor in fatal car crashes, which is the #1 killer of teenagers anyway, as alcohol was. So sleep-deprived kids are at risk physically, they're at risk cognitively, and what do we do? You know, this is another one of those things. What do we do about it? School starts, what time does school start here? 7:45, right? What's the natural sleep cycle for a teenager? What time does a teenager go to sleep naturally? Right, around midnight, their melatonin's kicking in and starting to make them sleepy. So if they have to get up at 6:30, then they're getting 6.5 hours sleep. They're almost 3 hours sleep deprived per night. They can't learn as well, they don't grow as well, they can't drive as well. Every function is impaired. So what do you do about it? Well, that's part of a community conversation. So we're not going to do anything tonight, but it should be, as everything I'm saying, you know, if I leave here and you go, well, that was amusing, and nothing happens, it's a failure as far as I'm concerned. It really is time. It's time to take the science that we have and do something about it in our schools. So I mentioned we have 100 Challenge Success schools. Have we gotten them all to start school at 9:30? No. Have we gotten about half of them to do a late start several days a week? Yes. And what do they find with even a small late start? They find that if you give a kid a half-hour later start, they actually get 45 minutes more of sleep. Why? Because their body is so happy to be getting a little more sleep that they get even more than the half hour. So a community discussion is, could we start a little later? And there'll be a whole host of reasons why it's not a good idea. You know, there's track and there's sports and what am I going to do with my other kids? But the reality is that it is impairing children. And there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, that's what this organization that I'm so involved in is really fighting for. We know a whole bunch of things about optimizing our kids' lives. They should sleep better. They should eat 3 meals a day. A power bar is not a meal, right? They shouldn't be under constant criticism. They must have downtime. You want them to develop a sense of identity. They have to have time to reflect, to just lay on their bed and be left alone and not have demands put on them. We know all these things, and yet kids are overscheduled, they're stressed out, they're not sleeping, they're not eating well. And you know, we're paying the price. And I think, unfortunately, because I speak about it so much, I get to see some of those really miserable prices. Right down Gunn High School, right next to Stanford, had 3 suicides in a row on the railroad tracks, exact same place, all high-performing kids. I don't know the reasons. I mean, I do know the reasons. They're much more complicated than anything I could express, but we don't need to wait till kids are impaired. 22% of kids are suffering from clinical depression. That should be intolerable. That is a public health emergency. And yet, because it's mental health, it's not treated that way. And I have a very strong feeling that I'll leave you with, which is there are a group of parents that are loud and narcissistic and very difficult, and somehow their voices ring louder than what most parents believe is in their kids' best interests. And it's like, you can hear in my voice, it's starting to piss me off. Because it's kind of like, you know, I go to school after school, and the principal will agree, you know, I see you're shaking your head in agreement with a lot of this. And then when I talk afterwards, there's always some discussion about the group of parents who come and make a lot of noise and say the school is no longer rigorous because there's some absolute confusion about rigor and the amount of homework that you're given. So Lonnie, who I mentioned before, fan in, what's the, is that the township, New Trier Township?
Yeah. Family Awareness Network.
Right. So what she did was, last time I was out there, we did this is just an idea, we did a workshop with about 150 community leaders, teachers, administrators, parents, clergy, you know, Janet, everybody who was interested. And out of that, they wrote up sort of a pledge and some ideas of how to change things. And then they took 65 people, again, community leaders, who are committed to making certain changes. Now, New Trier is not an easy place to make change, so we'll see what happens there. But I think it takes that kind of community effort. You just can't do it by yourself. It's a systemic problem, and the community needs to get together on it. Yeah. Yeah. You.
Okay, the research I've always read on homework, is that's like probably the thing that bothers me the most in my teenagers' lives, has always been negative. That homework, you know, kind of what you were saying at the beginning, that it's not a real reason to have all this homework. It doesn't do much good for the child in any way, shape, or form. I've read very little positive research on homework. And yet, you know, the kids still, every kid I know, I'm talking about my kids and all their friends, are doing 3 to 4 hours of homework a night. Now, the kids that have sports after school and don't get home till 6 or 7 at night and want to eat dinner, maybe watch a movie with their family, whatever, they don't have that ability. They have to be from school, from the sport to the homework all night. And this goes on, you know, it's been going on for years and years and years. What would be the possible reason that schools continue to give this amount of homework to kids when everything shows that it's so detrimental to your children?
Well, okay, so first of all, the first 2 hours of high school homework is not detrimental. So the research is that 2 hours advances cognitive
And
function.
I could understand, like, if you're studying for a test, you're reviewing what you learned
Right.
and all that, but to come home with packets and
Right,
all
well,
the busy work.
I mean, a lot of that is No Child Left Behind. A lot of that is you know, and your principal could speak to it probably better than...
And I don't blame any principal.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but there are demands on the schools that are absolutely intolerable.
Yeah.
So, you know, the teachers feel absolutely backed into a corner because if they don't meet standards, they don't get money, and the school doesn't have a football team anymore. On the other hand, there are teachers who say, I'm not doing it, I'm just not doing it. And the research on that is the teachers who are good teachers who don't do the standard curriculum, have kids who score higher on standardized testing than those who follow the standardized curriculum. But the standardized curriculum has come in and turned education from education into, you know, packet after packet after packet. I just got to tell you, I have a little kindergarten kid that I see, and she sent to me because in kindergarten they're starting to teach them how to fill the bubbles. And this little girl won't fill the bubbles. She draws animals out of all the little circles. So she gets sent to the shrink, right? And so I said to her, wow, it's really interesting. How come you didn't just fill in the bubbles? And she looked at me like I was stupid. And she said, because it's so boring. She's absolutely right. And if she doesn't get the creativity knocked out of her, she'll be a creative kid. But she may get the creativity absolutely knocked out of her. So again, it's a community problem. There's an amount of homework that's very helpful in high school. And then there's an amount of homework that is repetitious and not necessary and is simply there to ensure that kids can pass standardized testing so the school isn't penalized. How crazy is a system that penalizes schools that need help? It's like, if you need help, we will fuck with you. I apologize. My husband would not be proud of that. But the system is that deficient, and I think that's going to end soon. Actually, I think there's a lot of evidence in that it's just not working. Yeah.
Two things about the homework. Our daughter, she got really creative. Sent an email off to the teacher and said, you know, this is ridiculous. I can't do this. The teacher said, well, that was great. Excellent writing skills will count as one of your daily work. So she got out of the extra homework by doing the email, but not really. It counted what she did. Second thing, you talked about coping skills. What strategies of coping skills can you give us?
How to help your kids develop coping skills?
Yes.
I think the easiest thing I can say is make a little necessity in your kid's life, which I said before, right? So don't make everything easy. And this starts young. You know, you bring a juice box or Gatorade or an orange every day to your kid who's playing lacrosse after school. One day tell them, you know, can't do it today. I'm sorry, figure it out. And you don't want to make it an impossible task. You want an age-appropriate, you need to take care of this. And sort of anything that turns the kid in on his own resources as opposed to out on your resources is a good idea. That's why I put any decision you're going to make about your child, ask if it advances one of these three things. You know, Dad, everybody has a car. I just turned 16. Where's my car? And so where I live, the answer is, what kind do you want? and then I kid you not, I had a kid whose mother says, I'll give you my Lexus, and the kid says, that's a woman's car, I'm not going to drive it. And I mean, you know, really. And so they got him a BMW. I mean, this does not advance anything, any of those three things. He didn't learn it, no coping skills, right? Because there's no delay of gratification. The right answer is something like, if you want a car, if there's a reason to have a car, what do you plan on doing to help contribute to it? Let's write out a budget. You call the insurance company, here's the number if you need to do that, and tell me what the costs are going to be. You include the child at an appropriate level in all decision making. So you want to always ask, does it advance coping skills, identity, or connection? And connection's a big one, and because at the end of the day, nothing matters more than your relationship with your kid. That doesn't mean they're never going to be angry or you're never going to fight. But I'm here. You know, I need to know where you are. I love you. I care about you. We're going to work through this together. That's the most important thing you have going as a parent. Yeah?
That story just makes me laugh because I was thinking about who went to park. But when we,
I'm sorry, say it again. I didn't hear.
when we were talking about getting a car, and we did the evaluation, we talked about it, involved the kids in the decision, and we had them help pick out a reasonable car. We went to go negotiate on this car. We told the kids before we went in, negotiations, did everything, and we walked out. We got to the car and the kids looked at us and they said, oh my gosh, I've never seen anything like that. What happens next? Do you still get the car? I said, we don't know. I can't answer that question for you.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of a life lesson of,
Right.
okay, so you're right, we did all the research, you contributed, you've done all your research, and in fact, it doesn't always happen the way you think it will.
That's right. It's a nice story because I think there's this desire to sort of sugarcoat the story, like the kid did everything right, and of course he walks out with a new car. And sometimes yes and sometimes no. And a little deprivation actually in a lot of these kids' lives is a good idea because otherwise you end up kids with a sense of entitlement, and there is nothing worse than a kid with a sense of entitlement, and frankly, there's nothing harder to work with than a kid who feels the world owes them a living. They're really, really tough to work with, so, yeah.
Could you elaborate a bit on how would you help a child like your son Jeremy, who has these wonderful strengths? How do you help them to feel successful and to find their own strengths when they're part of an educational system that defines success by the numbers, the ACT score, the number of AP classes they take, and with teaching them that, you know, the kids learn how to take care of themselves.
Okay, so I think the real answer to that is that you have to really believe and feel yourself that what that child offers is valuable. So often I'll have a parent who is trying to make the kid who's not a good student feel good, and it's not from the heart, and the kid knows it. So I think I came from a very working class background. My dad was a cop, and so when he was interested in being a fireman, that was perfectly fine with me, and it really was perfectly fine with me. So the first thing is, to inventory yourself around, is there disappointment in this? Is there not disappointment? I mean, it was easy because I had more than one kid. If he'd been my only kid, maybe it would have been harder for me, but it wasn't. So, it was always about Jeremy. Jeremy's such a nice kid, and we all went to he was a lacrosse player, so we went to lacrosse, but I also took blacksmithing lessons. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as blacksmiths anymore, but he was good at it. Sure, I'll go along with it. And just your being there is a validation that it's a worthwhile task. Same thing with sign language. It was a validation that it was just as good to learn sign as it was to learn Mandarin. So I think a lot of it has to do with where you come from in your own heart, and because kids know when you're disingenuous, and if you can feel that it really is a privilege. I mean, he's a privilege to me to have somebody with that much compassion. So I talked a lot to him about how he was like his grandmother, and you have to be very careful when you look at the amount of time you allot to your different kids, because this is something I hear a lot, that the high-achieving kid tends to get the lion's share of the time. Just like I said, I had dozens of honor roll meetings and one poetry reading in 4 years of high school for my middle kid and nothing for my other kids. So you make that up in other ways. And largely by not making the focus all the time on the other kid and not comparing kids. I mean, it's very important not to compare kids.
How did you navigate that system, though?
How did I what?
Navigate that system. I mean, they still have to be in school.
How did I, what, that system?
Navigate the system. They still have to be in school.
Oh, you have to have a big mouth. You have to go up and talk to the teachers. I found, frankly, the best thing I did was to become friends with his guidance counselor. And we had wonderful, wonderful guidance counselors at our school. And as a result of that, he got put in the right classes for him. He got put in with male teachers who sort of got that he needed to move around. That was the best thing I ever did, was buy her flowers and say, if you ever have a problem and you want to talk about it, just give me a call. But the guidance counselor probably played the biggest part in making school tolerable for him. And the other thing, and I don't know if it's here or not, was they added a engineering track to Redwood High School, which is where my kids went to school. And that track was for these kids. So it was sort of like they learned CAD, computer-assisted drawing, they learned architecture, they learned engineering, and it was supposed to be like a one-year thing, but again, the guidance counselor for Jeremy made it all 4 years. They just sort of made a program for him. So she played a really important role, and you just have to be more active with a child like that than a kid who's you know, tripping through high school easily. You know? Sure. Yes.
Just a question. I love what is success, self-control, self-efficiency. I really like those a lot. My question is that when you have a child that has ADHD or a teacher and their children in your class that have ADHD, self-control is a really hard point for them to obviously achieve. So what would be your comments on that?
My comments on kids with ADD or ADHD?
With those particular self-control, self-efficiency, self-esteem,
Well, you know, clearly it's hard with a kid with attention deficit. Although, you know, one of the things that I find is that the way kids with attention deficit are treated in elementary school, sort of the first go-around of advice, tends to get carried all the way through. You know, so when a kid's younger, you're trying to get them to sit for 10 minutes, or you say, you know, 10 minutes and then you can have a cookie, or 10 minutes and then you can run around. I'm not sure that that's so effective with older kids. I can tell you in my office what I do with those kids that I think is helpful, and that is I do whatever it takes to engage them. And so that means if we walk into now you can't do this in a classroom obviously, but you can modify a classroom. Who says you have to sit at a desk, right? Who said that? For a kid who can sit at a desk, it's a better option. For a kid who can't, and I think maybe I'm idiosyncratic in this, but for a kid who can't, you can tell that kid from today till tomorrow, sit down, sit down, sit down, sit down. And it doesn't help, it's just drawn attention to his deficit, it's made him feel stupid, it makes him feel like school's a place he doesn't want to go to. Sometimes I think, like, why don't you let him just do what he needs to do? Because often those kids can perform much better if they're performing in a way that sort of suits their physiology. So when I would do homework with kids in my office who were major ADHD, we just walked around. We'd sit in the garden, then we'd walk down the stair, and they'd carry their books, and they could do so much better that way than my constant repetition. Now, there may be resource teachers in here who absolutely disagree with me, but I think I have a feeling like if a kid has a deficit, if all you're doing is paying attention to the deficit, how can that kid possibly feel good? So, you know, the preferable thing is to work with the kid, make sure there are islands of competence that you're paying attention to, make sure that, you know, you're celebrating the islands of competence, and work a little bit with their physiology. You're welcome. Okay, I think, am I supposed to stop? No? Yes? When am I supposed to stop? One more? Okay. Over there? That person or this? I'll take them both. Yes. Sure. Yes. She asked me if faith plays a role. Do I think that faith is a good thing? I do. I mean, and the research on it says that kids who are part of a family where that's faith-based, goes to church, tend to do better. So yes, and I think, you know, I don't know that it needs to be church or synagogue or whatever. I think having a meaning beyond my grade today is critical. Because one of the things I think is absolutely meaningful for kids that they don't have is a sense of something greater than themselves, right? If everything's about my satisfaction today, my gratification today, and there is no bigger issue, you end up with, again, with entitled kids. So I agree, and the research agrees with that, yeah. And yes.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we were talking about work ethic, and it's something that really concerns me. Extracurricular activity or go get a job. And because really, between school, and, they could be in the theater program, they can play a sport. Do you think any of those activities drive a work ethic of value, or is it really just work, work?
Oh, I absolutely think extracurriculars can drive a work ethic. I mean, kids who, I'm thinking about the kids, I see my own kids, the commitment to the team, the practice. I mean, what's work ethic? Show up on time, do what you're supposed to do, work hard. I mean, I think all those things certainly have the potential to be developed in extracurriculars. The research on that is holding a job for 10 hours or less doesn't impact a high school kid. Holding a job for more than 10 hours a week actually does impact their grades. So if a kid needs to work, fine. I mean, I worked when I was in high school. Plenty of kids work in high school. But I think you can learn a work ethic through a job, through your role in the house, through your role on a team, in the theater, whatever it is you're doing. Or work ethic is about persistence. Break it down. It's effort, it's persistence, it's diligence, and it's hard work. And there are many, many arenas in which a kid can develop that. Okay, thank you so very much.
Thank you all. We are off to a great start.